John, welcome to the studio, and we're going to have a very interesting discussion today about handwriting, which is kind of a dying art, isn't it, for the young?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me, Nicola. But yeah, it is kind of a dying art. Like, I had seen my own kids at home there. My daughter just started college, and it's all laptops, it's all typing, like very little with regards to written stuff anymore, like, you know.
But at the same time, people do still write letters. I mean, last year, one of the best things I was watching on the box was Wicked Little Letters, which was a brilliant drama. Olivia Colman starred in it, about these anonymous and really caustic letters that were under sort of police investigation as to who sent them, and not to ruin it for anyone, but the least likely person was discovered as being the author of them. But so handwriting as a sort of an arm, or sort of an opportunity, really, I suppose, for detectives investigating crimes, can come in all forms. You can have threatening letters that are written to people. You can have forged documents, really. And I suppose another thing that the gardaí will do is, if there's a suicide note, they will analyse it to determine if it's written by the individual who has been found dead. So I suppose tell us a little bit about yourself and your career first.
Well, Nicola, I retired about 2 years ago, having spent, the required 30 years. I could have stayed on, but the job had changed and whatnot. But 25 of those 30 years I spent in the technical bureau.
Yeah.
I was very lucky, that I had that opportunity, because I don't think I would have been able to cut it as a uniform guard. I just don't think I was suited to it. But I was very lucky in that early in my career, I got a chance to be exposed to the fingerprint section. And the minute I saw it, I said, this is for me, because, before I joined the Guards, I was involved in art and animation and stuff like that. So I was always very much, an eye for detail and stuff like that. So the fingerprints really appealed to me, plus the fact that these were all in plainclothes. They were all detectives, and at the time, the fingerprint section was state of the art. It had just gotten a new computer system in there. And
fingerprints are like our DNA, aren't they? There's no kind of identical one in the world.
Well, DNA, funnily enough, now that you mentioned it, DNA is brilliant evidence. It's fantastic. But identical twins will have the same DNA.
Yeah.
But they won't have the same fingerprints. So there's always kind of a bit of an argument between fingerprint experts and, DNA experts, scientists, stuff like that, which is the better.
Yeah.
Obviously they're both brilliant.
And they were always, in more recent times, identified through, so the fingerprints are taken, they're put through computer screening, and if there's a match, the individual can be found. And fingerprints, you can leave better fingerprints on plastics and things like that.
It just depends. Well, first of all, the computer won't make a match. The computer will only do what you tell it to do. So you still have to...
The human eye still makes a match?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And, the computer system is to help in the search, because before any computer systems, it was all done manually with a very complicated numerical sorting thing.
Mapping, really, of the fingerprint.
Yeah, well, you used to have to look at each thumbs and forefingers, determine what pattern it was, start counting individual ridges and stuff like that, and they all got numerical values and got filed away. But, now with the likes of AFIS, which would be the automatic fingerprint identification system, you can input a crime scene finger mark. You still have to, nominate patterns, nominate maybe a digit or finger or whatever, and correctly plot in all the detail. And all the computer will do is bring back however many you want, usually up to about 30 respondents that it thinks closely matches what you've put in. So then you have to look at each respondent, on the screen. And if you do think you've got a hit, then you go and you get the hard copy, the actual inked set of fingerprints. So the identification is still made with a magnifying glass,
right?
Looking from one to the other. And then it's verified by at least 2 other people. Like, the computer just speeds up
the process. And despite, I suppose, criminals becoming more and more aware of how they can be caught, it's still sometimes difficult not to leave your fingerprints when there comes to sticky tape and...
Sticky tape, even I've seen, and I had it once or twice myself, fellas wearing gloves, like, like surgical gloves or something like that, and thought they were being very clever, and they left the gloves behind them. And I managed to get a fingerprint inside the glove.
Yeah.
And identify them that way. Now, more often than not, you mightn't get that because there'd be too much sweat there and it wouldn't develop, or it'd overdevelop or something. But I remember that was a Cork case. It was just a burglary. But I remember for months and months after that, all I kept getting in was gloves.
Right.
Because they said, oh, your man got to
do it again.
Do it again.
Yeah,
but I never got another mark on it, But you just never know. Like finger marks, crime scene marks, they're chance marks, and then an awful lot of crime, say burglaries, UTs, that'd be, stolen cars, stuff like that. They're fairly opportunistic things, so there's not much planning put into it. So they mightn't be gloved up. You just never know. And
you talk about having a background in art. It is an iconic image when it comes to crime. The kind of the fingerprint from the black, the dust. And that sort of old sort of school.
Yeah, I remember there was always a cartoon up in one of the in the conference room in the fingerprint section like that, and it has this guy and he's tangled up in his own fingerprint. Like
yes.
Patch,
It's definitely one of those. So you move from fingerprints in the Garda Technical Bureau into handwriting, which feels like it's an even more sort of, it's a bit of a unique trade, I'm sure, being a handwriting expert in the Garda Síochána. There couldn't be too many? How many were you working with, or were you?
Well, when I went into the documents and handwriting section, there was 3 other members that were doing handwriting cases.
Yeah.
Very soon after I went in 2007, one of those left. So that left 2 others, and it took a couple of years to train me up. And by the time I left, which would have been 2022, I was doing not all, but pretty much the bulk of the handwriting cases that came in,
And nowadays, civilians?
It's all forensic science, Ireland.
Yeah.
There is still one Garda member attached to the document section, but he's coming up to retirement now shortly,
So it's been handed over to the scientists now, essentially.
Yeah, like in 2019, towards the end of 2019, there was a merger with what was the old Garda Technical Bureau with Forensic Science Ireland. So you had pretty much most of the fingerprint section, documents and handwriting, they were merged with FSI. Ballistics wasn't, and say any people that didn't want to go across to FSI went into what became the National Scenes of Crime Unit.
Right.
They're still referred to as the Bureau, the Bureau team. You'd see the white suits on telly and that, but their job is still the same. But now when they go to scenes and stuff like that, and they maybe take finger marks or exhibits, it's just handed over now to FSI. Whereas when I was involved with that and before the merger, you were in charge of whatever stuff you did all the way through till it came to court. You know.
So I did a little thing actually with Forensic Science Ireland earlier this year. They were 50 years in existence and they were having some celebration and a conference actually as well in Dublin. And they were talking about the move, and there's this fabulous new high-tech building, of course, out near Weston Airport, out near Baldonnel.
Back Weston or...
Yeah, now beautiful building and architecturally designed, including for the mental health of those working in it, that they can see the greenery and the trees and the little bit of brightness and lightness because of all the dark things that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
But some of the people I spoke to would have felt that the kind of the move and into this high-tech building broke the relationship almost with the gardaí that they were working with, and sometimes they would have been, it sort of have separated the two completely. So obviously the younger people coming up won't know any different, but this is, I suppose, change over the 50 years, but nonetheless. So handwriting is... It doesn't feel as if it could be as unique as fingerprints.
It can be if depending on the amount of material you have. The basic principles with handwriting identification, what it's based on is that no two people will write exactly the same way. you know. But even if you take one writer, like you won't write exactly the same way twice. So say if you wrote out a page of something and you write it again, it won't be exactly the same because we're not machines, you know. So it very much depends on the amount of material that you have to carry out comparisons. You know, and there's a lot of variables involved, but you can give fairly strong opinions, like up to conclusives.
Presumably, you know, the more material, the better.
Yeah, the more material. You know,
what are you looking at? The shapes of letters?
You're looking at basically. You're looking at everything, really, because, you know, you used to get cases in and the guard would say, oh, I think it's him because, you know, the A looks very similar. And I'd be like, well, what about the other 25 letters, you know? And then letters may be constructed differently depending on where they are within a word. Yeah. Or if they join onto another letter or follow a letter or whatever, you know. So you're looking at everything. Like, you're looking at what the style is. Is it, you know, block capital, is it joined up or cursive or script? You know, the individual letter constructions, the relative proportions, you know, from one to the other, the spacing between them. If it's on line pages, is it on the line, above the line, through the line? You're looking at everything, really. Because,
you know, when you're talking, the same concepts are probably now pushed to text messages and to the kind of language people use in them, the way they space out the words, the capitals, and I've heard it in a couple of court cases more recently when they're trying to identify who may have sent a text. And who didn't. And I'm thinking in particular of the case that didn't end up going ahead of Johnny Creswell, who was charged with the murder of Katie Simpson, the show jumper. And there was texts between two phones. She had been with a guy and they were texting one another. And they were able to identify when they believed Creswell took the phone because the text was a word that he used. Yeah. And he had used it, say, for example, 200 times, but the guy whose phone it was had never used it. So similar enough, I suppose, just bringing it into the...
I'd say, though, like, I mean, for something like that, it would take a long time and a lot of research and scientific whatever.
You'd have, I suppose, phraseology more so and
like
ways of spelling words and all the rest of it.
Well, spellings, phrases, even the content of handwritten stuff wasn't really my concern. Wasn't not the concern of a handwriting expert.
Right.
Okay, if repeated phrases or repeated words are used in two pieces of writing, that's great because you have the same, you know, collection of letters and whatever, you know. But no, it was really what you're looking at is all of the variations contained within somebody's writing. Again, because we're not machines and your brain is telling you to put something onto paper and it has to go all the way down through your arm, and depending on the writing surface, the writing implement, maybe even your own physical condition. Yeah. You know, all of these variables come into play. So, you know, I've often said that it was if I can pronounce it, an analysis of variances. So what you have at the end of the day is if you're looking at a question piece of writing or, you know, a question signature, and you have an idea of the degree of natural variation the writer has employed in it, and you're comparing that against a known specimen, and you're seeing if they match, you know. It's not like fingerprints or DNA in that it's evidence of identification that will stand on its own. It's supportive evidence, you know. But what I found in moving from the fingerprints side of things into the handwriting was when it came to court, you really had to sell it more, you know, because with fingerprint evidence, as you know, like, it's brilliant evidence. And if you can keep circling back to that when you're giving your testimony or whatever, you know, the defense don't want to hear about it because it's so good. Yeah. And it's been around for so long and, you know, it's scientifically proven, all this sort of stuff. Whereas handwriting is so many more variables involved. You know, like even, you know, I used to give scenes of crime classes about it. And I used to say, like, you know, when I was in secondary school, right up to my leaving cert, I used to write in lovely joined up writing. And then when I left school and I went working in the animation industry for a while, and then I was at home on the farm, I didn't write much for about 3 or 4 years. And then when I landed in Templemore, I had forgotten really how to write, or my muscle memory was gone from that. Yeah. So I started writing in block capitals. So if you look at my writing from when I was 17 or 18 and when I was 21, it's very different. Yeah. Whereas if I went straight out of secondary school into college, my writing would have developed a different way. So, it's very important in some cases, especially if you're dealing with more historic handwriting things, that you get specimens that cover that span of time, that are contemporaneous, because if there is that kind of evolution in somebody's handwriting, you want to be able to show it and explain why this is different than that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it really became something that, you really had to sell it. So
do you mean there was no actual science behind it?
There is science.
There is science.
It's it used to get hammered into us when we were talking about fingerprints, and you had, different stated cases about, does it meet the Daubert standard of, evidence? And it does, it has been peer reviewed. It has been proven time and time again, if the correct methodology is followed, that you will get these results, and which is completely different than, graphology. When people look at you, or people used to say to me, "Oh, you're a handwriting expert. What could you tell about me by my handwriting?" And that's,
you can't profile somebody.
That's bunkum. That's pseudoscience.
But presumably most of the cases, and we're going to talk in a minute about what sort of cases you're investigating as handwriting experts, but presumably most of them form part of a sequence of evidence if a case is brought to court, as opposed to they're not just the one piece that is going to make or break a case.
Yeah, certainly with the more serious cases, it's a supportive part of it. But, I've done a lot of cases, and, they'd almost be bordering on civil cases rather than criminal cases, but they kind of, there's a bit of a blurring of the line sometimes when you're dealing with, question signatures on wills or land documents or anything to do with money and stuff like that. So, I've had cases where, there was very little other evidence apart from maybe forged signatures on a ton of social welfare receipts or something like that.
Yeah.
But, again, they rarely tend to be challenged unless they get a defense expert in, and you're not going to get a defense expert in unless it's a bigger case or there's a lot of money involved and whatnot, And if you've done your job right, then the defense expert, if provided with the same materials, should come to the same conclusions.
Yes.
Yeah. But,
so now tell us, in handwriting, what sort of... So you're going to you're not the investigator as such, you're investigating the handwriting, and you'll be handing it back to whoever is investigating whatever the crime is. So gardaí from all over the country who are investigating all sorts of criminal offences will give to the then Technical Bureau, and now FSI, their evidence. So they will give you a bundle of documents of some sort. But what sort of cases were they investigating and were coming in?
It could be anything. You could have anything from, like what you were saying, an example there earlier on of just poison pen letters, nuisance stuff, I don't like the colour of your garden or your house or your dog is tormenting it. Question signatures on checks, on legal documents, and, right up to the, nasty threatening stuff, suicide letters,
there's a lot of that, because of course the most intriguing of that really is, of course, there is always a story behind a forged will and a forged, land document. There's always a fabulously interesting story probably behind all that. But I suppose for the general public, the poison pen letter is pretty intriguing. And it's kind of, why would someone do that? And why would they be writing these anonymous style letters to somebody? Very frightening for the recipient of them. And also really, I suppose, the case... And you deal with it in the first episode of your new series, Lines of Enquiry, your podcast series, which is produced by Go Loud, and it's everywhere people get their podcasts. But in this series, you're discussing and narrating stories, crime stories. But for me, the most intriguing of them is the one that you had an intimacy with, and it is this very bizarre case. And I say bizarre because I'd never heard of it before, and I should have, because it is pretty scary. And it was to do with these anonymous letters being written. You said earlier that your job is really to look at, I suppose, how the pen moves, how the shapes form in front of you, how the words are created, and trying to find a pattern. You're not really supposed to, to focus on what's in them.
Yeah.
But these letters were so frightening that you could not.
Yeah, you just couldn't, but you couldn't help but,
be drawn
into it, and even only there recently when, I was going back through some of my notes in helping to write the episode for the podcast. I was looking at some of these, copies of these letters that I still had, and I was like, holy God, there was some fairly, fairly explicit and violent stuff in there,
And again, this case kind of went under the radar of many journalists. And to me, I mean, this is the sort of the darkness of the Larry Murphy story, the vanishing triangle, the missing women, the kind of the evil that minds can create, be they fantasies or realities. Start from the beginning and how you kind of came upon this case.
Yeah, well, as I say, I'd already been in the handwriting section for nearly 10 years by that stage, and it was 2015. I was doing a good amount of the handwriting cases that came in, mixture of everything. That's what I liked about the handwriting was that every case was different. Every case was different, and this just was another nasty letters case or whatever.
And were you specifically given it, or did everything just come in to the bureau at that stage and you kind of took what was on top of the pile?
Pretty much, when stuff would come when exhibits would come into the documents and handwriting section, they'd be divided into, security documents, be it travel ID, currencies, stuff like that, to be checked to see if they were real or counterfeit. And then you had handwriting cases. And we also had ESDA, which would be looking for indentations on handwritten documents. So they were split into their different categories. But you really just go to the filing cabinet, whatever was next, you do it, unless something came in that was,
with an urgency, I imagine. Yeah. So anyway, you picked up. What was it?
And it was another nasty letter case. I'd seen many before, but this one was different in that it was quite long. It was 23 pages, I think, the first one I looked at. And it was, like that, the content stood out nearly straight away because...
Was it a letter, John, or was it an essay?
It was more like all of this stuff coming out of the writer's mind, and he wanted it down on paper about what he felt like doing, what he alleged he had done, what he was going to do. It wasn't addressed to anybody in particular, and it wasn't, obviously wasn't signed or anything like that. But most of the pages would be headed with some caption like "My plans to torture, rape, and kill teenage girls," or what I did to such and such. And it was 23 pages front and back of just constant stuff, explicit, violent, sadistic stuff. And
you'd not seen anything like this before?
I hadn't seen such a long letter and continuous, I'd often seen letters where it'd be sent to people and you'd have one or two threats in it, or some nasty sexual stuff, but the rest of it would be all mundane rubbish or whatever. But this was constant. Every single line was what he was going to do, killing people, burying them, escape-proof, soundproof dens and all this sort of stuff. And that was just in the first letter. And
how had this letter come into the possession of the gardaí? Where had it essentially been posted to, or whatever?
I can't remember exactly each
Was it a
letter.
college or?
That first one was received by the IT at Athlone Institute of Technology, and then subsequently forwarded to the guards and then sent in to us.
And was it specifically sort of warning that this individual was watching and was going to sort of target girls that were in colleges and schools?
Yeah, he was saying that it was his plans to abduct, torture, rape, and kill pretty teenage girls and college girls aged between, I think in his first letter, as he was, 15 and 16, 17, that type of stuff. He didn't really target anybody at the IT and Athlone in that first letter. But, subsequent letters, he became more, he started naming people, But that was the first letter. The only thing is, it came in on its own. It had been to forensic science for a DNA test. Excuse me. And then I would do the handwriting on it. And
had anything come up? Did you know? Were you told from the DNA?
Well, down the line, again, as things progressed, they did have a full DNA profile.
But nothing to match it against?
Nothing to match it against now. And the same with fingerprints. There was fingerprints developed, searched against the system, no hit. So
this was somebody who wasn't maybe massively forensically aware, was it? Did you think?
Not forensically aware, I wouldn't imagine, but also, unfortunately, hadn't come to the attention of the guards before, or hadn't had cause to provide a set of fingerprints or a DNA swab.
Yes.
Yeah. And what happened in the early part of it was, because it was the first letter came in from Athlone or wherever it was, over the next few months, a couple of more letters came in, but they came in from different Garda stations, say Burr and Tullamore. So they would have been sent in by different Garda members, probably brought in by a different exhibits officer, So it wasn't until I came across a second letter about 2 months after that, and very quickly after that, a third letter, that I saw, hang on, I know this writing, because I'd been exposed to so much of it. I kind of knew it. I had muscle memory in my head or whatever it is for this writing. And I said, I've seen this writing very recently. And I, very quickly went and got the first case out. And then I had the two subsequent cases coming in, and I said, yeah, this is the same guy. So unfortunately, no specimen writing, no suspects to compare it against. So all I could do was send out my reports to each of the investigating Garda members, saying that, by the way, this is the same writer that such and such guard sent in from the other stations. So kind of making them aware.
And that would make those investigations link up at least.
Eventually, yes. Yeah, because then it was around then that, I was speaking to the girl in the forensic lab, that she was getting the same DNA profile of the letters,
And from your point of view, although it wasn't your job, you're still a policeman, you're probably going, okay, these are all in a sort of an area. You'd imagine that the individual lived in the area, would you? Or you can't?
You'd have to think so, because as the letters went on, he wrote about details about how long it would take in regards to how many minutes to drive from one little village to another little village by this route, by that route.
Right.
He knew the area, he had all these things down, like how long it would take to get to his hunting grounds, as he called them, how long it would take to stalk and abduct somebody by hitting them over the head with a hammer, how long it would then take to drive back to where he had a hide, how long it would take to undress them, how long it would take to strangle them.
And just talk and explain what a hide is.
Yeah, well, be it a hide or a den or whatever, he wrote about in nearly all of his letters that he had, escape-proof, soundproof torture chambers or dens and stuff like that. And he went into great detail about all the different equipment and things he had there for carrying out his fantasies on his victims. But it was after getting the third letter, I think it was, that I decided that, this guy is, I've come across him 3 times in the space of just a couple of months. He's prolific. Maybe he sent stuff before I was doing examination of handwriting or whatever, because there was still, there was other people there doing casework, and we kept, the guards is great for handwritten records of, all of the cases going back certainly to the 70s in hardback ledgers.
Right.
What date they came in, who they came from, what type of case it was, blah, 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 So I just went back through the years looking for possibles within the cases that had been received.
By the Technical Bureau?
Yeah. By the document handwriting section. And, some of them I looked at no, it wasn't the same writer, or it had already been a report gone out on it, and it was finished with. But eventually I came across one from 2004, which would have been, this would be 2016 by this stage. So it was a good period before that. And it certainly was a couple of years before I was even in the handwriting section. But I was able to retrieve the file, and it had photocopies of handwritten material in it. And straight away when I saw it, this is the same guy.
Right.
So this was written or found in 2004. It was 12 years prior.
And was it a similar sort of fantasies that were being...
Similar content, again, very much detailed into what his plans were. He was saying he was going to commence in the summer of whatever it was, 2005, going out on Saturday and Sunday nights, driving around till he finds his victims, who have to be, pretty college girls of a certain age and whatnot, and what he was going to do with them. It was the same detail. It was that same repetitive content. But the thing with that particular case was, as well as the photocopies of the material, and there was a lot of written material in that, there was also a report from a guard about where it was found. And this wasn't a letter that had been posted or, received at a guard station or whatever. It was actually found in one of these hides or dens, or, a makeshift version of one. And what happened was, in 2004, I think it was February, there was two young lads just playing in a wooded area just outside Tullamore town, and they came across something unusual in the woods and told their parents about it. The parents reported to the guards, and the following day, one of the Tullamore gardaí went out there, and he had to cross fields to get to this place. It was a wooded area. Got in there anyway and found a wheelie bin, partially buried in a furrow dug in the ground and covered in plastic. Nearby there was, I think, a notice board had been hammered up onto a nearby tree, covered in plastic, but underneath the plastic was, images of newspaper clippings of girls and women, and some pornographic images from magazines. And then in the wheelie bin itself, all wrapped up in plastic, was, there was some, I think there was a hammer and, cable ties and a handsaw and, adult nappies, stuff like this. There was a shovel and a spade nearby, and a biscuit tin, and the biscuit tin contained the written material that,
you had identified as being the same as your guy.
As being the same guy.
Jesus.
And this was 12 years prior to this. And, the letters were still coming. Although that hide had been found.
The hide had been found, but nothing more had come of it.
Nothing had come of it. Now, I don't know, I can't recall where other exhibits, I'm sure they would have been forwarded for fingerprints and DNA. But again, this guy, as it turns out, wasn't on the system. And like that, it was outdoors and stuff like that. Okay, the contents of the bin were wrapped in plastic and all that, but I don't know whether that stuff was sent up or not. But
it's Tullamore again. It's the Midlands. It's the same area,
yeah.
And again, the locations of these would-be fantasies are in that area, and now the hide is there too.
Yeah.
So you're sort of, I suppose, the investigators outside this who would be looking on where these letters have come from, got to be focusing on Tullamore. But is there any evidence, or is there any suggestion that there's any live cases? Because you're investigating the writing of letters which are totally inappropriate and disgusting, really, and scary. But you don't have any actual crime essentially committed, or do they? Is anything in the letters indicating that?
The real, technically there was a crime. If people have listened to the podcast, they
exactly, we'll get
out about it. But,
yes, that unravels, and we get to that. But I think what I mean is sort of
even at that, it's a crime prevention thing as well,
for sure.
But
is there any suggestion in these, letters that there has been a crime committed? Is there any names being mentioned?
Yeah.
And
well, there was the letter writer was naming a lot of people by first names. He was talking about a daughter that he supposedly had and a niece, all underage, all being abused by him. And he mentioned, again, a lot of people by first name saying he'd carried out rapes or he'd done this, he'd done that. And, you know, like, we didn't know that it was real or not. Like, you know, very likely, it's all fantasy, but we didn't know.
You don't know. And is he claiming any, you know, any connection to any of those cases about the Vanishing Triangle, the Deirdre Jacobs, the Annie McCarricks, these sort of names that we know? Was he claiming any of that?
Well, in 2 of the subsequent letters received, he claimed that he had killed Fiona Pender. You know, and he also made reference to Deirdre Jacob. He didn't say that he had abducted her, but he said what he would have done if he had. Likewise, he made reference to and even included photographs of them, of 2 Irish women that had been killed abroad in around that time. You had, I'm trying to think, Karen Buckley, Cork girl that was killed in Glasgow, and Jill Marr that was killed over in Melbourne. And again, he was saying, like, what happened to them would have been mild compared to what he was going to do. You know, and he was building himself up to be, you know, worse than all of these offenders out there. Like, I mean, he called himself, you know, he said that he claimed he was going to be the new, you know, serial killer and rapist, and he was going to be the beast of all sex beasts.
Did he ever mention Larry Murphy by name? Can you recall?
Not by name, but again, okay, it's in the podcast. Like, I mean, he did have a fixation with him.
Yes, and he mentions Graham Dwyer.
And Graham Dwyer as well.
Yeah.
You know, very much so, a fixation on them.
I wouldn't like to meet this guy, by the way, and I'm just digging down into it, and he sounds really scary. But that was, at the moment, this you know, you don't know who he is, but you know that these letters and that and then the hide thing suggests this is somebody that is really, really concerning.
Yeah, like, well, it shows a level of dedication, you know, to not only be writing all this stuff, like, for to sit down and to constantly be churning this stuff out. Like, I mean, he was writing more than you'd even need for a novel or something, like, because every letter that came in, dozens of pages. And this was just the stuff that we were finding, you know, and then making these preparations, having, you know, as he said, his rape kit and all these things, all his tools and stuff that he had ready to go, you know, so he was very, very dedicated to this.
And as you continued your investigation, as did others, and subsequently, and we won't ruin the end of the podcast Lines of Enquiry here on this, but safe to say that a second kind of hide is discovered, and you do ultimately, Garda, you do ultimately identify this man. He's brought to court, and as we said at the beginning, it happened during a period of time in 2015, 2016, when maybe a lot of focus was going into gangland crime. But the individual was identified, and indeed he was living in the area we discussed. Now, that is one of, and I listened to that the other day and was chilled to the bone by the beginning, the middle and the end of it, I can tell you. But it's one of 8 stories that you tell on the first series of Lines of Enquiry, which is produced by Go Loud and which is everywhere you get your podcasts. But you had also written about it in your book, Identity.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's probably where the people from Go Loud and Barrow Media became aware of me, you know, and I was overjoyed to be given the opportunity to come and work on the podcast, because when they initially contacted me, I thought, okay, they're looking a bit of background, maybe an interview. You know, but like, no, we want a host. And I'm like, what? It's like, you know? But, and it's happened very quickly. But
and you're delving into stories, some of which, and maybe that's the theme, while some of them I do recognise and are more recent, but some of them are forgotten crimes that we don't know anything about because we've either, were reported back in the day, or they just haven't become mainstream stories, yet they are all terrifying.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's a great mix in the stories, and some of them haven't been, you know, broadcast yet. But, you know, the team and myself, you know, we it's a collective effort. Like, you know, okay, I was involved in a couple of the cases we cover in the first season.
Yeah, the handwriting will come in and out of some of the episodes, but ultimately you're sort of digging into how investigations evolved.
Yeah, like, you know, we're very dedicated to accuracy. Okay, we're also aware that, you know, it is an entertainment platform, okay, be it grim and whatever true crime is, but we want to tell a story that the listeners will find interesting, but also that is truthful, you know, and give it that bit of authenticity. Not that other true crime things don't have that, but what I think Lines of Enquiry is different is that they have me as a host. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back or anything like that, but I worked in the Bureau for 25 years. And okay, I wasn't involved in many of the investigations we talk about, but I do know that side of things. And I do know, you know, what maybe...
I think personally from listening to it, there was probably from your own career and your work in the Technical Bureau, there's a slow, methodical thing that goes with that work, and that has come in to the telling of the stories.
Absolutely, yeah. And
it feels like nothing is rushed and that you're getting the detail you want as you go along.
And it's brilliant because, you know, I worked on the Midlands Letter script, and two of the other people on the team you know, would come in with suggestions and maybe just check something, in fact check and stuff like this, you know, offer advice on how to, you know, maybe do it better because, you know, I'm new to this, but it's really good because it is a collaborative effort, but, you know, I'm there to make sure that, you know, the way things are portrayed from the Garda point of view is accurate. You know, I don't mean to be putting them on a pedestal, but I will do most of the time because of, you know, the people that I worked with in those in those types of cases. But just to make sure that it's accurate, and we have to be also, you know, even more important is to be, you know, mindful of the victims or the victims' families.
Yes,
you know, because all of these stories, there's none of them they're not happy stories with happy endings, and some of them are unsolved.
Indeed,
you know.
And do you get called still, John, to cases that you may have worked on to give evidence? Yeah,
you know yourself the way the courts work. It's, you know, glacial speed sometimes, depending on the cases, and you know, it could have been something that I did years ago and I've completely forgotten about. But then most of those would be on the lesser scale. Like, you know, I would have been aware of any big cases that were in the offing when I was retiring, you know, and more often than not, the way the courts work, even when you do turn up, you're not needed, like, you know, but occasionally you still get called. But what I found with working now on the podcast with Lines of Enquiry was that, going back into this stuff and looking at it now, okay, I'm still the same person, but I'm not technically a guard anymore. So I'm slightly, you know, I'm removed from it somewhat. And I found it very interesting going back into some of this stuff, looking at some of my notes and kind of saying, Jesus, yeah, what I did do was a brilliant job, very interesting, but also very important.
Yes, yes.
You know, and it's kind of...
And specifically, I think, in that case, because that individual is in prison.
Yeah.
Still, as we know.
You got a lengthy sentence out of it, you know. But I have to say, like, okay, handwriting played a good part in it, but it was the local guards in and around Tullamore and that
but it was like
really
a jigsaw, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you're putting together the pieces of the jigsaw, and the handwriting was very important to that. And eventually a full picture emerges, and the guards get to go and knock on the door.
It was. And I spoke with one of the members intimately involved in it not too long ago. And even he, to this day, like if he's out for pints or something like that, he'll end up talking about that case. And he's been involved in a lot of stuff, like, you know, a lot of high profile things. But it's that one he always goes back to because he says it was so weird.
Yes,
you know?
It was. It's nice to see somebody like that locked up before the fantasies become a reality, because I have to say, from covering the Graham Dwyer trial, you could see how long the fantasy lasted when it was on paper and he did write out what he intended doing.
Right.
And that seemed to satisfy him for a long time until eventually it didn't satisfy him any longer.
Yeah.
And that's when he actually played them out. And that's when Elaine O'Hara died, and he was in the process of trying to get himself to the States to murder another woman, really, when he was caught. So yeah, that idea of somebody's fantasy going down on paper will eventually, if they are left unchecked, become a reality.
I think of it, it's kind of like a gateway drug, like, you know, you start off.
Well, I would see those hides and the developing of those sort of areas of in the lonely forests where victims could be brought as definitely being a huge step towards it becoming a reality. You know, he was probably very, very close to playing out those fantasies.
He was. He had to be, because, I mean, by the time the second hide or den came to light, and it was a much more,
even more frightening. What was there?
It was moved on a bit,
yeah.
You know, and he had only recently finished it at that time, like. But even afterwards, like, you know, he was psychiatrically evaluated and all that, and the doctors said, like, there was a marked escalation, you know, mixed in with probably his mother dying around the same time or something like that. But there was a whole just list of factors that, you know, he was only going to, like you say, he was only going to remain on the page for so long.
Yes.
And we just didn't know if it was going to take that next step. But thankfully, like, all the investigating gardaí involved were taking it that seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and they tried every avenue until eventually, you know, and it was almost a stroke of luck. We got him, like, you know.
But you got him. So you have to tune in, listeners, to Lines of Enquiry. And John Sweetman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. Pleasure to be here.